there's a lot of successful artists, when you think of like the Drakes of the world who, went through, UMG and then Young Money and Cash Money. And there was a lot of layers to those deals, right?
Yeah.
But Drake is still a global icon, right? So my thesis is that, or my belief is that if you're consistently growing
Mm-hmm.
and your streams are growing and your trajectory is growing, there's no inherent need for the label to withhold money from you.
Mm-hmm.
The issue becomes when you go for a project and you don't recoup on that project and you're plateauing or your fan base is decreasing. That's when the labels don't feel the need to reinvest or re-up in your project. And I think that's the big disconnect.
You know a lot about this world, man.
Mhm.
What brought you so much interest in this world here?
I think I understood that I had a very good technical understanding even prior to music.
Uh-huh.
Like I got into this business by writing grants in the Canadian grant system.
Yeah.
And I realized that a lot of artists who had, 1,000 followers, 2,000 followers would get grants because they understood how to write a business plan. And then you would have artists had 50K, 100K followers local in the city that would not get any grants. And I was like, what's the rationale? Because the Canadian funding bodies would disclose all the grant winners, right? So I started to look into it.
Oh, okay.
And I was like, yo, why is XYZ getting a grant, but the person that I know who's doing the numbers and streaming getting the grants? And I realized that just understanding process. So understanding process is just like what allowed me to just keep on searching, and just doing a deep dive on the process of how royalties are collected, the process of doing a producer agreement, the process of a label deal. And I just kind of just became very, very hyper focused on understanding the process of each sort of business dealing.
Do you think it's overly complicated?
100%. I think that even attorneys, who are underwriting these deals don't understand the mechanical rate or don't necessarily understand, how metadata is being reported by each distributor because each distributor has its own unique way of doing things.
Have you come across attorneys where you realize that they don't know what they're underwriting?
I've come across deals where attorneys write these ridiculous clauses of like, when you recoup your publishing advance, it's based off 2/3 of the mechanical revenue that you've earned from XYZ. And it's like literally an investment banker's nightmare to calculate those numbers, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think, the attorneys themselves don't even know how to calculate those numbers as well.
Is there a way to simplify this from your perspective?
I think by just, when you're negotiating deals for your clients, to just be very, black and white. I don't like operating in the gray, so I kind of, that's my mindset when it comes to working with these deals.
What do you mean when you don't like working in the gray? Can you
I don't like, for example, if a client is going to an option 1 or an option 2 of their publishing or their master agreement, it's like, I want to make sure there's a very clear path forward to go to the second option.
Yes.
Right? I don't want it to be like this thing where there's a lot of ambiguity of how to exercise that second option. And then, the label's not having a defined time frame to get back to you, right? Because if I'm exercising an option and my artist is moving, I don't want to wait 3 months for the option to kick in when things are moving around.
Yeah, real shit.
Like I want to make sure that, okay, yo, I'm going to give you guys, hey, by the way, I delivered this project. What does the path forward look like for option 2? And if you don't respond, by 90 days, it's like, then I'm going to take it, as you don't want to renew the option. So like having those things up front are super important.
In the paperwork of the agreement,
yeah.
the contract.
Yeah, because that's where everything, that's where the magic is made, right?
All right, folks. I hope you're enjoying this convo. There's a ton of value that you can extract from it. And speaking of which, if you're an artist or manager watching this and you want to get more in-depth strategies regarding your career, then my one-on-one consultations could be for you. These are fully personalized, just you and me tackling whatever you need in your career. Now, if you're not familiar with me, if you don't know, I have over 16 years of experience working with artists like Jesse Reyes and Eminem, to managers like Troy Carter and Tyler Henry, to working with brands like Nike or the Toronto Raptors. I have deep knowledge in many areas of the music business that can help you map out your next moves. Whether that's helping with your personal brand or creating a marketing plan or building out your content strategies that actually provides results, or simply navigating the music industry to whatever is most relevant to where you're at, I want to help. You can now book a one-on-one consultation session for a fee with me through my Calendly. You can find the link in the description below. Now let's get back to the pod.
What are some other things that people should be looking out for when they're actually doing a deal with a major to make sure that they're not getting stuck in a situation where they can't put out another song or another project if something is going crazy?
Well,
And when I say something going crazy, let me be more specific. If you have a song that is actually streaming real revenue consistently, really growing, but now you can't put out a second song.
Yeah. Well, I think also too, like there's this clause, which is pretty standard in most label deals, where it's like, there has to be commercial satisfaction. It's commercial satisfaction.
Yeah.
Has to be enough, which essentially means that, it needs to be approved by the label, right? If you're moving, the label wouldn't want to reasonably withhold your momentum. However, if you are, let's say, going from option 4 to option 5 and you're going to your last album deal, there's kind of like this influence to deter the label from making you release that sort of last single or that last project, because it comes to the point where like you're out of your deal, right? So, I think it's a very dynamic thing, but a very common thing, for example, is like singles versus projects, right? We live in a singles-based era.
Yes.
So, an artist can release, 10 singles, right? And that won't even count towards one project. So they over-deliver music.
What do you mean?
So let's say, you have an option, you have a traditional label deal. They say, okay, they want 5 albums, right? 5 albums, let's say, comprises a minimum of 12 recordings or 10 recordings. You deliver those 10 recordings as singles, and it's not packaged as an album, they won't count as commercially satisfaction for that album, right?
Yeah.
So you want to do things like, okay, I can deliver, a project, but 5 of them can be singles.
Yeah. Or all 10 could be singles, but it's going to constitute as one album. 10 singles is the equivalent of one album.
Because you get into a position where a lot of artists actually over deliver on their contract, and it's the one place where it's like, the artist wants to feel the need to release music. They're putting up the bread, or they're using that existing marketing advance or A&R advance to create that music, but they're not actually getting the benefits of the upside on the delivery when they deliver it.
No, it's a good point. Do you recommend that artists over deliver on, songs, even though it doesn't go towards the contract, but because you want to satisfy the general public as well?
I think you want to support what the artist wants to do, right? And just explain to them that, hey, like, it won't count as a delivery, but we live in such a short-term based attention span economy that you have to consistently feed the streets with music, right?
Yeah.
So you can't, I'll never deter an artist from not doing something that they truly want to do, but also explain to them the implications. Like, hey, like, if you deliver those 30 additional singles and you're still on option 2, you still got option 3, 4, and 5, like, honest truth,
So how do you protect IP from the artist and prevent, rights getting lost in bad agreements, bad contracts, I should say?
Yeah, well, there's two forms, right? The first form is that you pick up a client and you're with them from before the process, or a client, fires their whole team. They're looking for new business management support, and you inherit a new contract, right? So when you inherit a new contract, it's a very different approach from when you pick up a client from ground zero, because from ground zero, you can just kind of train and educate them on all the implications and play scenario analysis. But when it comes to inheriting a contract, you have to live within those contractual means and find a cohesive strategy to do that. And sometimes you can negotiate an existing contract as well. It's not completely out of the norm, but it's just a harder process.
And so how do you go about that, negotiating an existing contract? Can you provide an example? You don't have to say names, but like an example of something that you've done before? Or
no, I think there's examples where, a lot of boutique labels, for example, want to, invest in an artist, but the artist is growing faster than the boutique label, and they don't have necessarily the cash resources to fuel the fire. So, what you could potentially do is like, hey, like, I'm on my 3rd option. Why don't you release me, take an override on the next deal, and, also still get that unit economics on the music to make sure that we sort of fit the contractual terms, and also recoup any balance that you have for any existing music released with the current, label. So,
okay, I have average intelligence at best. Let's break that down a little bit. Okay, so when you're saying override on a deal, what does that mean?
So, for example, let's say if I sign you, you become bigger than me, and I'm a boutique label. Like, I don't have the crazy staff, that UMG has, right? I signed you for, let's say, $100K. We get to a point where, you need $1 million budgets.
Yes.
But I'm not in a position to provide those $1 million budgets.
Yes.
Right. So What happens is that, you come up to me and be like, yo, like, I want to find a more strategic partner. I know I have, projects that are pending delivery. How can we work this out?
Mhm.
And then, we come to the point where it's like, hey, you know what? I'll release you from your contract, but in exchange for me releasing you on your contract, on the next project that you release, whether you go independent or whether you go with another label, I also participate at a smaller rate
Yes.
going forward. But for anything we worked on before that sort of new negotiation happened, if it's unrecouped, it stays there until it becomes recouped.
Recouped, and then if there's, you can get still generate revenue off of that if you've licensed it for X amount of years.
Correct.
Or if you own it outright or have in perpetuity.
Even if you license something for 5 years or 10 years, if you still remain unrecouped, you're unrecouped even beyond that licensing period, traditionally,
Yeah, of course.
So, I think it's a way for you to pivot the situation. It's not ideal, but there is some room for negotiation. Everything's negotiable.
A lot of people kind of look down on the advance, right?
Mhm.
So, and I don't think that's necessarily accurate. I feel like everybody's situation is very different. And I think you just have to kind of look at it in terms of like, okay, well, where are you financially?
Mhm.
Can you use that to get out of a bad situation that you're
Mhm.
currently in? And then can you actually create a good process and a system for you to be able to build a real business? Because at the end of the day, an artist is a business. So you're
Correct.
building a brand, right? And so you want to make sure that you're making the right decisions in order to grow that business. So an advance can make sense. You know what I mean? For certain
For sure.
aspects. But I guess the question is like, when would you recommend an artist go for an advance versus doing something self-funded?
Yeah, and just to add to your point too, is like there's a lot of successful artists, when you think of like the Drakes of the world who, went through, UMG and then Young Money and Cash Money, and there was a lot of layers to those deals, right?
Yeah.
But Drake is still a global icon, right? So my thesis is that, or my belief is that if you're consistently growing and your streams are growing and your trajectory is growing, there's no inherent need for the label to withhold money from you. The issue becomes when you go for a project and you don't recoup on that project and you're plateauing or, your fan base is decreasing. That's when the labels don't feel the need to reinvest or re-up in your project. And I think that's the big disconnect. I think that the capital that you earn, whether it's a label, whether it's independent, if you're making great music and your fan base is growing, I don't think it necessarily matters who's providing the capital. One's more cost effective for sure, because if you go seek independent capital outside of the label ecosystem, you might get better financing. But, I think when you look at the greats, they've all met their contractual needs, have went independent or renegotiated their contract, and now they're in their supermax era.
Yeah.
So like, it's like, it on one side is like, yeah, it can trap you there because if you don't recoup. But if you make it through the hurdle of delivering 5 projects and being in the money, like you have successfully, you're like the 1% of the world.
And you have to ask yourself, if you are incredibly successful and your business is growing, why would you stay at a label, right? It makes sense because ultimately the label's going to do a more favorable deal. Drake is one of them, but the best case scenario we could talk about is Taylor Swift.
Yeah.
Taylor Swift, for example, she renegotiated her deal because clearly there's real revenue that's coming. There's a growing business. It's attracted a ton of investment, a ton of visibility. Universal Music is a public company, so it's great for the public, for the shareholders. So they're going to renegotiate a deal in her favor, right?
No, 1,000%. And I think now we've come to the point because a label can no longer by itself break a hit. Like before, 20, 30 years ago, you could push a button and get, radio,
Yeah.
Like we live in such a different time now, right? Where it's like, the contractors that, the same marketing agency you can contract independently outside of the UMG ecosystem because they just subcontract a lot of the marketing, right? So if you can find a way to source your own capital and monitor your P&L, I think this is where a business manager actually amplifies a business when a client maintains an independent business.
Again, average intelligence at best. Let's go back for a second. What's a P&L?
P&L is profit and loss, right?
Okay.
So, if I were to do a traditional label deal, they'll give you $1 million deal, $500K is paid to you in your pocket, $250K, upon delivery, and let's say another $250K marketing budget. So the all-in budget is $1 million, right?
Mhm.
And let's say the distribution rate is, let's say you're doing a JV 50-50, right? The onus is that the budget is controlled by the label, right?
Mhm.
But if you could go get your own external financing and have your own business manager or someone on your team control that budget, you can actually achieve the same thing, if not more efficiencies,
Okay.
right? So, I think that when you become independent, the need for the business manager actually just increases a lot more because now the money's in your account
Yeah.
and you need to figure it out,
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's where the profits and loss statements come in. So essentially meaning
Yeah.
like how much revenue you're generating,
Yeah,
then spending.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then also too, like, people just think of music as like the advanced game. Like, no, the real business is creating a company,
Yes.
building IP. That IP becomes valued at something at a crazy multiple, right? You look back 2-3 years ago, people were paying 18x for records, right?
Yeah.
Because that was what the market deemed, right? Like it is an asset class, right?
Yes.
So you're building IP within your company, and then you use that as a launching pad to build more businesses. And I think that's where the business manager is essentially shifting the role from becoming like someone that's just paying bills, taxes, and bookkeeping to a strategic operator, to a CFO, to COO.